Good morning, everybody. It's Grampy here again, and as usual, I have my little friend Elivu here, but we're also joined by another little friend whose name currently is Oliver. He's the last of our collie puppies that we've had from the last litter. Anyway, there's a thought I heard a quote the other day, and it said, "A Bible that's falling apart is usually owned by someone who isn't." And I'm not going to say my Bible's falling apart, but it's well used, and I love this book because it contains the words of life. And there's a thought that was on my mind this morning when I woke up, and it has to do with the question of identity. And I think that identity is probably the number one question, whether we actually recognize it as such or whether we don't. There's this inner need to have this question answered. Who am I? Why am I here? In Ecclesiastes 3, it talks about that eternity is put in our hearts. And it has this idea that we're asking these questions about, like, is this all that there is to life? Or is there more than this life? It's like, who am I and why am I here? And I think that if we look at our lives and look at what people do to attempt to resolve that question, we can see why people are so vulnerable and why people are so driven for acceptance, for approval, why there are such addiction problems, where there are cycles of codependency and unhealthy relationships and things like that. And so much of it comes back to this question: identity. Who am I? And I'm not sure, it might have been John Piper who said it, but I'm going to give him credit. But he said the question really isn't who am I? It's whose am I? Because ultimately, that is what defines our identity and answers that deep question in our hearts. Like, why am I here? Who am I? And there's a couple of verses we're going to look at this morning. The first one is in Isaiah 43, and it says, "But now, thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee." And I love this verse because God specifically, highlights this essential reality that fear is tied to the insecurity of who we are. And we do a lot of things to try and resolve that fear. We seek security in other people, their opinion. We seek our value from whose group we're in, and what people say about us, how many clicks, how many likes we get on a post. All those things are driven by fear and a need to be accepted. We put ourselves in compromising situations where we know what we're doing is wrong or we have doubts, but we seek the acceptance of people or of a group or of an individual or something like that, when it really comes down to we only need to please one person. We only need to find our security in one, and that is the God of heaven, who has called us by thy name. He says, "You are mine." And when we look in the New Testament, Paul wrote to the Colossians in Colossians 2, he says, "For we are complete in him who is the head of all principality and power." There's a completeness, a satisfaction that comes from knowing that we are in Christ. We're no longer left just to our own resources, our own righteousness, our own abilities, our own, appeal, any of those things. What comes down to giving us that deep satisfaction is that we are in Christ. He owns us. We are called by his name. And the last verse I'll mention is from 1 John, where it says that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. And that is where the perfect love of God, that we know God is our Father, that I don't have to worry about being called by my name, David Smith. God's name is on me, right? I am in Christ now. I am owned. I've been bought with a price. I am no longer my own. And that is a very freeing thing. I no longer have to be driven to prove who I am, to seek acceptance, to fear that people are going to see the real me. Therefore, I can't admit that I have this weakness. No, all of those things are resolved when we just are content and have that assurance that we are God's, that He is our Father. I am called by His name, and I no longer have to be driven by the slavery to prove who I am to anyone. That's a good word today. Isn't it, doggies? I love you guys.